Sagrada Familia. The Sagrada Familia is a Roman Catholic Basilica in Barcelona, Spain, designed by architect Antoni Gaudí. Begun in 1882, it is still under construction. It is Gaudí's masterpiece and the greatest exponent of Catalan modernist architecture. It is the most visited monument in Spain and is the most visited church in Europe after the Basilica of St. Peter's in the Vatican. When it is finished, it will be the highest Christian church in the world. The Sagrada Familia is a reflection of Gaudí's artistic plenitude. He worked on it for most of his professional career, but especially in the last years of his career, where he reached the culmination of his naturalistic style, in which he achieved a synthesis of all the solutions and styles tested until then. Gaudí achieved perfect harmony in the interrelation between structural and ornamental elements, between plastic and aesthetics, between function and form, between content and container, achieving the integration of all the arts into a structured and logical whole. From 1915, Gaudí devoted himself almost exclusively to the Sagrada Familia, which is the synthesis of all the architect's architectural evolution. After the completion of the crypt and apse, still in neo-Gothic style, the rest of the temple was conceived in an organic style, which imitates the forms of nature, where ruled geometric shapes abound. The interior was to resemble a forest, with a set of inclined, helical tree columns that create a structure that is both simple and resistant. Gaudí applied all his findings previously experienced in works such as Parc Güell or the crypt of the Colonia Güell in the Sagrada Familia, and managed to create a temple that was structurally perfect as well as harmonious and aesthetic. The Sagrada Familia has a Latin cross floor plan, 5 central naves, and a transept with 3 naves, and an apse with 7 chapels. It has 3 facades dedicated to the birth, passion, and glory of Jesus, and, when completed, it will have 18 towers, 4 in each portal, making a total of 12 for the apostles, 4 on the transept, invoking the evangelists, 1 on the apse, dedicated to the Virgin, and the central dome tower, in honor of Jesus, which will reach 172.5 m in height. The temple will have 2 sacristies next to the apse and 3 large chapels, the Assumption Chapel in the apse, and those of Baptism and Penance, next to the main facade. It will also be surrounded by a cloister designed for processions and to isolate the temple from the outside. Gaudí applied a high symbolic content to the Sagrada Familia, both in architecture and sculpture, as he dedicated a religious meaning to each part of the temple. During Gaudí's lifetime, only the crypt, the apse, and partially the Nativity facade were completed, of which Gaudí only saw the tower of San Bernabe crowned. Upon his death, his assistant, Domingo Sugrains, took charge of the construction. Subsequently, it has been under the direction of various architects, with Jordi Folli Ayala being director of the works since 2012. Artists such as Laurent and Joan Matamala, Carles Mani, John Busquets, Joaquim Rosai Bofarol, Itsuro Sotu, and Josep Maria Subarax, the latter author of the decoration of the Passion facade, worked on the sculptural decoration. The work that Gaudí made, that is, the Nativity facade and the crypt, was included in 2005 by UNESCO in the World Heritage Site Works of Antoni Gaudí. It is a monument declared in the Register of Cultural Assets of National Interest of Catalan Heritage and in the Register of Assets of Cultural Interest of Spanish Heritage, with code RI 51-0003813. It is also, since 2007, one of the 12 treasures of Spain. Also, in 2007, it was chosen as one of the 7 wonders of Catalonia. The temple was declared a minor basilica in November 2010 by Pope Benedict XVI. That year, the newly built main nave of the temple received the City of Barcelona Prize for Architecture and Urbanism. The Sagrada Familia is also popularly known as the Cathedral of the Poor, because of the painting of the same name by the modernist painter Joaquin. History. The works of the Sagrada Familia in 1883. In the photo appears the first architect, Francisco del Villar. The idea of building an expiatory temple dedicated to the Holy Family came from the bookseller Josep Maria Bocabella, inspired by the priest Josep Menyonet, canonized in 2004, founder of the religious congregations Congregation of Sons of the Holy Family and Congregation of Missionary Daughters of the Holy Family of Nazareth, in charge of promoting the cult of the Holy Family and encouraging the Christian education of children and young people. In 1869, Mignonet published The Spirit of the Holy Family, where he launched the idea of a temple in Barcelona dedicated to his worship. To this end, Boccabella founded in 1866 the Spiritual Association of Devotees of San Jose, with the aim of raising funds. In 1871, Boccabella visited Pope Pius IX in Rome and, within that trip, visited the sanctuary of Loreto, Ancona, which is supposed to house what was the house of Joseph and Mary in Nazareth, a temple that served as inspiration for the projected church in Barcelona. In 1881, Boccabella bought a plot of land for the construction of the temple in a place known as El Poblet, near the Camp de El Arpa, in San Martín de Provençals, at that time an independent municipality that would be added to Barcelona in 1897, between the streets of Provence, Mallorca, Marina, and Sardinia. This land was included in the Plan Certa de Ensanche de Barcelona. The plot, 130 by 120 m, was a little larger than the normal blocks of the Ensanche, normally 100 by 100 m, because in the Certa plan it was reserved for a racecourse, which was not built in the end. It cost 172,000 pesetas at the time. The works of the Sagrada Familia in 1889, the upper part of the crypt and the beginning of the apse are visible. In order to disseminate its work, the Association of Devotees published a magazine in 1867, initially called El Propagator de la Devoción a San José. Note 1 directed by the Mercedarian priest José María Rodríguez Borri. In 1948, it was renamed Temple and, from 1981, Temple in Catalan. Since 1895, the project has been managed by the Board of Builders of the Expiatory Temple of the Holy Family, a canonical foundation created to promote the construction of the temple through donations and private initiatives. Its ex officio president is the Archbishop of Barcelona, currently Juan José Omella. In 2001, the Junta received the Creu de Sant Jordi Prize awarded by the Generalitat de Catalunya. Successive projects by Francisco del Villar for the Sagrada Familia. The final one was that of the Rite, which began to be built and was interrupted with the resignation of Villar. Villar Project, main and side fade. Plan of the Sagrada Familia by Villar, 1882. Plan of the Sagrada Familia made by Gaudí, 1885. From its beginnings, the Sagrada Familia was paid for with alms and donations, which caused the works to slow down or even stop on several occasions due to the lack of contributions. In 1891, for example, a large donation of just over 500,000 pesetas, paid in monthly installments between 1891 and 1898, from the last will of the widow Isabel Bolt, made it possible to begin the construction of the Nativity facade. Similarly, in 1905, at another time when the works were almost stopped, the poet Joan Maragall wrote an article entitled A Grace of Charity, to call on public opinion to collaborate with the construction of the temple. Portrait of soldiers in front of the Sagrada Familia, 1896. Photographed by Pau Eduard. The project was first commissioned by the diocesan architect Francisco de Paula del Villar y Lozano, who after several successive projects devised a neo-Gothic complex and rejected Boccabella's idea of making a replica of the sanctuary of Loreto. Villar's project consisted of a church with 3 naves, measuring 44 by 97 m, with typical Gothic elements, such as honeycomb windows, exterior buttresses, and a tall bell tower in the shape of a needle, which would have reached 100 m in height. The first stone was laid on March 19, 1882, St. Joseph's Day, with the presence of the then Bishop of Barcelona, José María Urquinaona. Gaudí attended the ceremony, 26, as he had worked as Villar's assistant on some project. At that time, it could not be imagined that he would become the architect of the work. 28 To commemorate the event, a pillar was placed at the entrance door of Mallorca Street with the date, the pontifical coat of arms, and a cross. The work did not begin until August 25, 1883, and were awarded to the contractor Macari Planella, Aurora. In 1883, Villar resigned due to disagreements with Boccabella, who had the advice of the famous architect Joan Martorell. The project was offered to Martorell himself, but when he refused, it was offered to a young Gaudí of 31 years. The architect from Reyes took charge of the works on November 3, 1883. Gaudí had been Martorell's assistant in several constructions, a fact that motivated the recommendation of the recently graduated architect, who had not yet executed major works. When Gaudí took charge of the project, he modified it entirely, except for the already built part of the crypt, and gave it its peculiar style. However, he could not change the orientation of the building, as the foundations were already made. Gaudí would have preferred to place the axis of the building diagonally to the block, to place the apse facing east, and to have a longer floor plan. For the remaining 43 years of his life, he worked intensely on the work, the last 15 exclusively. In addition, the last 8 months before he died, he lived in the temple workshop. This intense dedication can be explained, in addition to the magnitude of the work, by the fact that Gaudí defined many aspects as the construction progressed, instead of having previously specified them in his plans and instructions. For this reason, his personal presence in the work was of great importance. Gaudí had the help of 2 of his most loyal collaborators, Francisco Berenguer and Juan Rubio, almost from the beginning. Later, around 1909, he had the collaboration of Josep Maria Jujol. On Berenguer's death in 1914, Domingo Subgrades, until then second assistant, became his first assistant, and in 1918, Francesc Quintana joined as second. Gaudí estimated that the construction would last for centuries. For this reason, he proposed to the Junta Constructora to build vertically instead of horizontally. So he raised and finished the facade of the apse first, and of the Nativity later, so that the generation that had begun the work would see something finished, and, simultaneously, that finished facade could serve as a stimulus to future generations to continue the temple. His proposal was accepted. The temple grew slowly, and Gaudí changed the project as he went along, a project that gradually evolved into construction as the architect's ideas were outlined, which he reflected in models that he made in his workshop. Aware of the magnitude of the work, Gaudí put more effort into its conception than into its realization. The poet Joan Maragall, a friend of the architect, commented in 1900 that, "I understand that the man who has put the most of his life into the construction of this temple does not want to see it completed." Article entitled "The Temple That Is Born," published in the Diario de Barcelona. For Maragall, the temple was more a symbol than a building, the redemptive project of a city that expresses a collective aspiration for moral development, the construction that redeems from all destruction. For Maragall, the Sagrada Familia is the poetry of architecture, the temple that does not end, that is in perennial formation, the temple that constantly awaits its altars. The Sagrada Familia in 1905. Between 1908 and 1909, Gaudí built the Sagrada Familia schools on the land destined for the glory facade, intended to provide education to the children of the workers and to children who lived in the temple. They were inaugurated on November 15, 1909, by the Bishop of Barcelona, Juan José Lagarda y Fenolera. Its realization entailed a cost of 9,000 pesetas, which was paid for by Gaudí himself. On December 11, 1921, the first stone of the nave of the temple was laid, specifically that of the base of the column dedicated to Tarragona, with a blessing ceremony officiated by the Archbishop of Tarragona and Metropolitan of Catalonia, Francisco Vidal y Barrique. The Sagrada Familia in 1906. In 1923, while Gaudí was still alive, the Bulletin of the Association of Architects of Catalonia published the calculations of the structure of the naves, signed by his assistant, Sugrains. These calculations have been based on those that have continued construction, although it has been necessary to adapt them to comply with the regulations currently in force. Gaudí, aware that the construction of the temple would be carried out by later generations, footnote 6 tried to define the project on plans, but, knowing that he would not have time and life, he made several plaster models on a scale of 110 and 125 of the most significant parts, in the hope that they would be used as models in the rest of the building. Gaudí designed the central nave, the sacristy, and the glory facade in three-dimensional models. The model of the main nave was to serve as a model for the rest of the naves, and the model of the sacristy was to be the model for the central towers. During Gaudí's lifetime, only the crypt, the apse, and the nativity facade were partially built, as only one of the 4 towers was completed. The architect only saw the Tower of St. Bernabe crowned. It had the collaboration of several artists. In sculpture, Carles Mani, Laurent Matamala, and Joan Matamala. In drawing, Ricard Apisso. who worked as an office assistant developing plans and making profiles of figures or motifs to scale. On his death in 1926, run over by a tram, his assistant, Domingo Sugrains, during the years 1926 to 1936, took charge of the works, who completed the 3 towers that remained on the Nativity facade, the Sagrada Familia in 1917. On July 20, 1936, 2 days after the coup d'état that caused the Civil War, anarchists of the FAI set fire to the crypt, so that most of the workshop in which Gaudí had worked, where his sketches, models were located, was destroyed. A few days after the destruction, the architect Luis Benet I Gari requested that the broken fragments of the models be rescued, which were saved. Among these, others that were buried and that were later recovered, and the photographs preserved of the original models from 1940. Luis Benet, Isidro Puig I Boda, and Francesc Quintana restored and reconstructed the models, drew up their plans, and built a new replica of the model of the main nave on a scale of 1:10, which can be seen today in the Museum of the Basilica. Gaudí shows the works of the Sagrada Familia to the Pope's nuncio, Francesco Raganesi, 1915. On that occasion, Monsignor Raganesi described Gaudí as the Dante of architecture. When, in 1944, it was decided to continue the construction of the Sagrada Familia, it had to be defined first of all how to proceed to build the temple in the most faithful way to Gaudí's ideas. In charge of this gigantic task were the architects Bonet, Quintanar, and Puig Boda, while the sculptural work was carried out by John Busquets and several other sculptors. The works resumed on June 30, 1948, with a small ceremony consisting of the celebration of a Mass in the crypt and an act presided over by the members of the construction board in the window of the transept, the first to be addressed in this new phase. The definitive impetus came in 1953, thanks to the publication of a pastoral letter from the Bishop of Barcelona, Gregorio Madrigo, in which he expressed his desire to speed up the works. The following year, the Junta Constructora decided to build the second facade, that of the Passion, paid for thanks to donations, annual collections, and the beginning of the entry of visitors to the works. The towers of the Fade were completed in 1976. The main set of sculptural figures on the new Fade was commissioned in 1987 to Josep Maria Subirachs. Likewise, the Japanese sculptor Etsuko Soto collaborated on some sculptures on the Nativity facade, the fruit baskets on the exterior windows, and the restoration of the sculptures on the Puerta del Rosario. From 1987 to 2012, the works were under the direction of Jordi Bonet I Armengol, when he was replaced by Jordi Folli I Aller. In 1987, work began on the naves of the temple. In 2000, the central nave was covered, and in 2010, the entire temple was covered. Project for a starry square for the Sagrada Familia, 1916. One of the points that has sparked the greatest controversy around the Sagrada Familia is its location in the urban fabric of Barcelona. When the works began, it was located in the middle of the countryside, but it was soon integrated into the rapid development that took place in the city at the beginning of the 20th century. In 1916, Gaudí carried out a project to encompass the Sagrada Familia within the Romy-Porcel plan, the urban development project heir to the Josely plan, a new project of links that was to connect the ensanche of the Certa plan with the new added municipalities. He conceived of placing the temple within a garden area in the shape of an octagonal star, which would have provided an optimal view of the temple from all the surrounding areas. Finally, due to the cost of the land, he reduced the project to a 4-pointed star, which allowed a wide view from all vertices. However, Gaudí's plan was not carried out in the end. In 1975, the Barcelona City Council carried out an urban study that planned to set up a cross-shaped area around the Sagrada Familia, with 4 landscape squares at each end of the temple. Even so, at present there are only 2 of these squares, and the creation of the new ones would mean the demolition of several buildings. So the ideal solution to frame the Sagrada Familia and its surroundings is being studied. In December 2013, the City Council published a report with several proposals for the urbanization of the temple surroundings, prepared by the firm Estudi Massa Bosch Architects, in which 8 possible solutions were offered. Leave it as it is. Make a 60m wide avenue to Diagonal Avenue, which would partially affect 2 blocks of buildings. Make the same avenue, but narrower. Make a narrow width avenue up to the street Valencia, which would only affect one block of flats, to make an avenue 2, the widest diagonal, completely demolishing the 2 blocks. Completely eliminate the first block, creating a square similar to the 2 adjacent to the Nativity and Passion facades, the 4-pointed star sketched by Gaudí, and finally, a smaller variant of the previous one. The final decision must be made in consensus between the City Council, the Construction Board, and the affected neighbors. The works of the Sagrada Familia in 1928, as Gaudí saw them before he died. The Sagrada Familia has had several outstanding events. In 1921, the Jubilee year of St. Joseph was celebrated with processions, pilgrimages, and masses, and Handel's Alleluia was sung by 1,000 choir singers from all over Catalonia, conducted by Luis Millet. In 1952, on the occasion of the XXXV International Eucharistic Congress held in Barcelona, the monumental staircase and the artistic illumination of the Nativity facade were inaugurated. Mass communions were celebrated. A prayer of the nations for the peace of the world was made, and the sacramental auto, the marriage lawsuit of body and soul, was performed by Pedro Calderón de la Barca. Numerous personalities have visited the Sagrada Familia. Popes John Paul II, 1982, and Benedict XVI, 2010. The King and Queen of Spain, Alfonso XIII, 1904, and Juan Carlos I, 2002. The then Japanese Prince Akihito, 1985. The President of France, François Mitterrand, 1992. The President of China, Jiang Zemin, 1996. The President of Portugal, Jorge Sampaio, 2002, etc. Gaudí shows the Sagrada Familia to the Bishop of Barcelona, Enrique Rey Casanova, and the President of the Commonwealth of Catalonia, Enrique Prat de la Riba, 1914. Between the 1940s and 1980s, a part of the unbuilt site of the temple was dedicated to the practice of basketball for the young people of the neighborhood. In 1940, the Unión Deportiva Sagrada Familia was founded, later UD Gaudí, which had its first track on Car de Marina bordering Mallorca, 1942 to 1949, and then moved to Car de Sardina, 1949 to 1955, Car de Mallorca, 1955 to 1965, and Car de Marina, 1965 to 1987. In 1987, the track was closed to locate the new access to the Temple Museum. In 1981, the Placa di Gaudí was opened in front of the Sagrada Familia with a garden project by Nicolas Maria Rubio Taduri, where the pond stands out, and whose waters the temple is reflected. The following year, on the occasion of the centenary of the laying of the first stone, the temple received the visit of Pope John Paul II. Likewise, on March 18, 2007, the 125th anniversary of the laying of the first stone of the temple was commemorated with a party, concerts, and dances of Sardana, La Santa Espina, surrounding the temple. The Sagrada Familia is the usual setting for numerous cultural events and religious gatherings. Chief architect Jordi Folli announced in October 2015 that construction was 70% complete and had entered its final phase of erecting 6 bell towers. Visitor entrance fees of €15 to €20 financed the annual construction budget of €25 million. In this model, the parts already built are blank 2023. On August 20th, 2017, a solemn mass was celebrated at the Sagrada Familia in memory of those who died in the attack on the Rambla on August 17th, with the presence of King Felipe VI and Queen Letizia, the President of Spain Mariano Rajoy, the President of Portugal Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa, the President of the Generalitat Carles Puigdemont, the Mayor of Barcelona, Ada Colau, and other authorities. In 2018, a long-standing dispute between the temple and the Barcelona City Council was settled. Although, when work on the temple began, the Junta Constructora requested a building permit from the City Council of San Martín de Provençals, then an independent municipality. After its annexation to Barcelona in 1897, a new license was not formalized again in the Barcelona City Council. On October 18, 2018, an agreement was announced between both parties regulating the license for the project and announcing the development of an urban plan to improve the environment, as well as a project for the Sagrada Familia metro station to have direct access to the same temple. In this agreement, the construction board agreed to make compensation of €36 million for the inconvenience caused by tourism to the neighborhood environment, which would be used to make improvements to the environment and transport. The sculptural work by Josep Maria Subirachs on the Passion facade was declared a cultural asset of national interest on February 11, 2019, according to the cataloging carried out by the Generalitat de Catalunya, which pointed out that it is an exceptional episode in contemporary sculpture that has made its author an essential reference of Catalan art. In March 2020, the works of the Sagrada Familia were stopped due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Visits to the temple were also paralyzed, which were resumed on July 4th after the appropriate measures were taken to avoid contagion. The first visits were offered free of charge to health professionals who fought the pandemic. On the other hand, on July 26th, a mass was offered for the victims of the coronavirus. The halt of the works entails the renunciation of the estimated objective of finishing the works in 2026, the date of the centenary of Gaudí's death. That same year, on September 26th, an indefinite strike was called by subcontracted workers of the Sagrada Familia, which sought to achieve the conversion of all staff to permanent contracts, the normalization of the working calendar, and the payment of workers affected by the ERT. The company replaced the strikers with security personnel and, on November 7th, a demonstration in support of the strike was broken up by police forces. On December 17th, the company dismissed 231 workers who were on strike or furlough. In January 2021, work resumed, with the initial goal of finishing the Torre de Maria that same year. Church history. Aerial image of the temple in 1930 by Walter Mittelhalzer. The first Mass was celebrated on March 19, 1885, in the chapel of San Jose in the crypt. The temple was initially a parish tenure of San Martin de Provençals from 1907, with Gil Pires, a friend of Gaudí, as custodial chaplain, until it was erected as a parish in 1930. His first father was Maria Bertran, who was succeeded by Luis Puig, 1948, Joan Cleric, 1955, Joan Paulissa, 1975, Luis Bonet I Armengol, 1993, and Josep Maria Turul, 2018. It is currently the seat of the Archpriestship of the Holy Family, which includes the churches of the Holy Spirit, Immaculate Heart of Mary, Our Lady of the Rosary, Saint Olegario Bishop, and Saint Thomas Aquinas. On November 7, 2010, the Temple of the Sagrada Familia was dedicated to religious worship by Pope Benedict XVI, in a ceremony attended by the King and Queen of Spain, Juan Carlos I, and Queen Sofia, together with the Archbishop of Barcelona, Luis Martínez Sistac, and various authorities, including the President of the Generalitat, José Montilla, the President of the Congress, José Bono, and the Mayor of Barcelona, Jordi Hero. In this ceremony, the Pope declared the Sagrada Familia a minor basilica, being the 9th church in the Catalan capital to receive this distinction. Note: from July 9, 2017, Sunday Masses, which until then were celebrated in the crypt, began to be celebrated in the main nave of the temple, by decision of Archbishop Juan José Omella. On October 21, 2017, a beatification was celebrated in the temple, that of 109 Claretian martyrs, killed in 1936. The ceremony was presided over by Cardinals Angelo Amato, prefect of the Congregation for the Causes of Saints, and Juan José Omella, Archbishop of Barcelona. In 2018, after the retirement of Luis Bonet I Armengol, footnote 8 Josep Maria Turul was appointed parish priest of the Holy Family Basilica, the first to hold the position of the basilica as a whole, and not only of the crypt as had been the case until then. The temple. Plant. When Gaudí began to direct the construction of the temple, only the crypt had been started, in which he modified the capitals, which went from being in the Corinthian style to another style inspired by plant motifs. Gaudí evolved from the first neo-Gothic project towards his particular naturalistic, organic style, inspired by nature. The architect believed that the Gothic was imperfect because its straight forms, its system of pillars and flying buttresses, did not reflect the laws of nature, which according to him is prone to rule geometric forms, such as the hyperbolic paraboloid, the hyperboloid, the helicoid, and the conoid. Ruled surfaces are shapes generated by a line, called a generatrix, when moving on a line or several, called guidelines. Gaudí found them in abundance in nature, such as in reeds, or bones. He said that there is no better structure than a tree trunk or a human skeleton. These forms are both functional and aesthetic, and Gaudí employed them with great wisdom, adapting the language of nature to the structural forms of architecture. The architect assimilated the helical form to movement and the hyperboloidal to light. He said the following about ruled surfaces. Paraboloids, hyperboloids, and helicoids, constantly varying the incidence of light, have their own richness of nuances, which make ornamentation and even modeling unnecessary. Sagrada Familia section. Gaudí modified his conception of the temple over the years, as the interruptions of the works, due to lack of economic resources, gave him time to look for new structural solutions. He also took advantage of his experimentation in other projects to incorporate his most successful innovations into the Sagrada Familia. The crypt of Colonia Güell, as well as the galleries and viaducts of Park Güell, helped him to adopt new architectural solutions based on hyperboloids and paraboloids, as well as helical columns. Likewise, the towers of the Sagrada Familia were inspired by an unrealized project for Franciscan Catholic missions in Tangier, 1892, commissioned by the Marquis of Cumulus. Without the large-scale testing of warped forms, helical shapes in the columns and paraboloids in the walls and vaults, which I have done in Colonia Güell, I would not have dared to use them in the temple of the Sagrada Familia. Antoni Gaudí. For Gaudí, a key element in his way of conceiving the structure was the parabolic arch or catenary, also called funicular force, which he used as the most suitable element to withstand pressures. Through the simulation of different experimental polyfuniculars, he determined the optimal shape of the structure to withstand the pressures of the arches and vaults, first in the crypt of the Colonia Güell, and then in the Sagrada Familia. He developed a scale model of interwoven strings from which small bags of pellets, simulating weights, were suspended. Thus, he determined the funicular forces and the shape of the structure. Therefore, based on the state of loads, simulated with the bags of pellets, he experimentally determined the ideal shape of the structure, which he called stereostatic, which reproduced the optimal structure for working under traction, and which, by inverting it, the ideal structure for working under compression was obtained. Project of the Catholic Franciscan missions of Tangier, which served as Gaudí's model for the towers of the Sagrada Familia. Gaudí conceived the interior of the Sagrada Familia as if it were the structure of a forest, with a set of tree-like columns divided into various branches to support a structure of interlocking hyperboloid vaults. He tilted the columns to better receive the pressures perpendicular to his section. In addition, it gave them a double twist helical shape, right-handed and left-handed, as in the branches and trunks of trees. By the set of elements applied to the columns, inclination, helical shape, branching into several smaller columns, he achieved a simple way of supporting the weight of the vaults without the need for external buttresses. He designed a basilica-type plan in the shape of a Latin cross, with the main altar above the crypt, in a presbytery with an ambulatory, surrounded by 7 apsidal chapels. In front of the altar, a transept with 3 naves, with the portals of the Nativity and the Passion. In a longitudinal direction, the central body, with 5 naves, with the portal of the Glory. The floor has dimensions of 117 by 82.5 m, and the built-up area will have a total area of 4,500 square meters. Its capacity will be 14,000 people. The complex will also include a cloister that will surround the church, intended for processions and to isolate the temple from the outside. In the center of the section corresponding to the apse will be the chapel of the Assumption. It will also have 2 sacristies on the sides of the apse facade, as well as the large circular chapels of baptism and penance on the sides of the Glory facade. The main level of the temple is elevated 4 m above street level, leaving a basement and semi-basement occupied by the museum and workshops. The workshop of the Sagrada Familia, 1926. The temple will have 18 towers, 4 on each of the 3 facades, making a total of 12 for the apostles. In the center, the lantern tower dedicated to Jesus, 172.5 m high. Another 4 dedicated to the evangelists around the lantern tower, and above the apse, another lantern dedicated to the Virgin. They have a parabolic profile and have helical stairs that leave the central part hollow to place tubular bells arranged as a carillon. Next to the temple, Gaudí built several annex buildings. The chaplain's house, built in 1887 and renovated between 1906 and 1912, a simple brick construction, to which various spaces were attached for Gaudí's office, a model workshop and a photography laboratory, and the schools of the Sagrada Familia, 1909, a small building used as a school for the children of the workers who worked on the work. House of the Chaplain of the Sagrada Familia, used as Gaudí's office and workshop. Photo appeared in Lot Illustratio Catalana, Barcelona, March 18, 1906. Gaudí conceived a complex iconography that was based exclusively on its condition as a Catholic temple and on religious worship, for which he adapted all the architectural elements to the liturgical rites. To this end, he was mainly inspired by the liturgical year of Prosper Garanger, a compilation of all the religious cults and festivities produced at the end of the year, as well as by the Roman Missal and the Ceremonial of Bishops. For Gaudí, the Sagrada Familia was a hymn of praise to God, in which each stone was a stanza. The exterior of the temple represents the Church, through the apostles, the evangelists, the Virgin and Jesus, whose main tower symbolizes the triumph of the Church. The interior alludes to the universal Church and the transept to the heavenly Jerusalem, a mystical symbol of peace.